Okay, this video is the cell is like a city. And I previously made a video about cells like a city, so you can call this part 2. I'm just going to go into way more detail on the current one. So a couple of general points. Everybody talks about DNA being the brains of the cell, but Bruce Lipton made an interesting point. He said the brain of a cell is the plasma membrane. That's where all the receptors are. I'll go into some more of his ideas in just a moment. But he said the better way to think of the DNA is as the blueprints for the cell. There's 3.3 billion base pairs. That's a book with 3.3 billion base pairs of complex chemistry. And that's why, the more you learn about a cell, the more you believe in God, because it's just too incredible. Okay, and the nucleus is kind of like the town hall. Another way to view the DNA in the cell as a bunch of computer programs where it's kind of optional. And that lady, Brooke Goldner, had a great quote. She said that you can think of the DNA as like a menu in a restaurant, and then how you live your life and what choices you make at the restaurant or choices in your health, they determine what you order from the menu. And you want to order the best possible things so you get the best possible DNA expression. You can't totally change your DNA and become 7 feet tall and be a star in basketball, but you can certainly make the difference between yourself being most likely healthy or not healthy, skinny or fat, that sort of thing. Okay, the nucleus is then connected to the rough endoplasmic reticulum, where you do a lot of protein synthesis, for example. The endoplasmic reticulum also stores calcium, kind of like a bank. Proteins that are made are often shipped to the Golgi apparatus, which is like a protein processing factory, and it's like a post office. It sends them to where they need to go. Some things are secretory, for example, going to go outside the cell. You can also think of the endoplasmic reticulum with the ribosomes being like a factory for making proteins. Okay. The recycling center of the cell is the lysosome with digestive enzymes. The smooth endoplasmic reticulum makes your phospholipids and your cholesterol. The microtubules are like train tracks. By the way, I'm going to get into way more interesting stuff. We're just warming up. Okay, we're going to talk about the mitochondria in a moment with more detailed pictures. It's a rather amazing thing. It's thought to have arisen by endosymbiosis, where one bacteria engulfed another bacteria, and the second bacteria, the original bacteria was just anaerobic, but this mitochondria had the possibility to use oxygen for oxidative phosphorylation, which enables it to make tons more energy. You can make about 36 ATP from one molecule of glucose with the mitochondria. With the cytoplasm glycolysis, you can only make like 2 ATP. Okay, so that's the basic introduction, and a lot of this stuff is connected. There's areas where the endoplasmic reticulum is going to be connected to the Golgi. There's going to be areas where it's connected to the mitochondria. They sometimes call those MAMs, mitochondrial associated membranes, between the endoplasmic reticulum and the mitochondria. Okay, here's a little more of this information. I'm going to get into tons of pictures, but I just have to start a little bit with this stuff. The plasma membrane is also the city wall, the guard. It guards the city from the things in the outside world. The ion pumps are an electrical battery. It's a sodium battery. The vacuoles that can hold fluid are like a water tower to hold water for the cell. You'll also have vesicles in the cytoplasm. For example, in skeletal muscle, the glucose type 4 transporters are held in there until insulin binds to the cell, and then they're sent up to the plasma membrane to merge with it and allow glucose to come in. So they're like transport trucks. And they can also send out neurotransmitters, send out hormones to outside the city. And there's incredible machines on that plasma membrane like flagella and cilia. They're quite extraordinary. Some proteins have difficulty folding on their own, so they have nurses like helping an old person who's debilitated to get dressed. Heat shock proteins deliver worn out proteins, non-functional proteins to the lysosome for recycling. So the heat shock proteins are like garbage trucks. The ubiquitins can chop up. Ubiquitins mark something as garbage to be destroyed, and then the proteasome chops it up. The proteasome is like a wood chipper. It's a kind of a scary machine, all right? You have an immune system running around the body. Well, that's sort of separate from our individual cell, but that's like the cleanup crew. Our sialic acids at the edge of our glycocalyx, glycosaminoglycans, those are like our identity cards, okay? Clotting proteins are like engineers, okay. Okay, now I want to talk to you about this guy, Bruce Lipton, because he said a lot of interesting stuff. This is one of his books, Biology of Belief. He's got several videos on YouTube, and some of them are quite good. Some of the things he said was, first of all, he said the brain of a cell is not the DNA, it's just the blueprints. The brain of the cell is the plasma membrane. The reason it's the brain is because it has all the receptors there, and it decides what the cell does. So he describes it as like your eyes and your ears and your nose all go right to your brain, providing sensory inputs, and then the brain makes a decision about what to do, and the plasma membrane decides what to do. He also described the receptors on the plasma membrane as almost being like the keyboard of a computer, and the outside world types onto the keyboard what is happening, and then the plasma membrane decides how to respond to it, and it sends a message to the nucleus, like a transcription factor, and the transcription factor determines what genes are expressed. So what he's saying is that's like typing onto a keyboard with the plasma membrane receptors being the keyboard, and then going to the nucleus, which contains the hard drive with the different computer programs, and deciding which program to open. And he also talks about the biology of belief in the sense that how we view situations determines how our cells function. If you view something as positive, you'll function in a positive way. If you view it as negative, you function in a negative way. Anyways, it was rather clever what he said. Okay. Here is a mitochondria. It has an outer mitochondrial membrane, OMM. It has an inner mitochondrial membrane, IMM. That's where electron transport occurs. The space between the inner and the outer mitochondrial membrane is called the intramembranous space. And that's where the protons are pumped when they're pumped out of the inner membrane. The center of it, that's all yellow here, that is the mitochondrial matrix. That's where Krebs cycle is located. Krebs cycle is also called the tricarboxylic acid cycle. Sometimes it's also called the citric acid cycle. Okay, and the mitochondria is rather extraordinary. This inner mitochondrial membrane proton pump is really like a nuclear reactor. It's quite extraordinary. It will split the atom. And when I say split the atom, what am I talking about? Essentially, it rips carboxylic acids off of molecules from glucose and from fatty acids. And then it uses the CO2 as a waste product. We exhale that when we breathe. But it takes the hydrogens and it splits the atom. It splits the hydrogen into a proton, H+, and that's pumped out of complexes 2, 3, and 4, and that builds up a gradient in the intramembranous space of proton power. Okay, and then it strips off the electron from the hydrogen molecule, and it hands those down through a series of protein complexes, with oxygen being the ultimate electronic sector. Of all the molecules in the periodic table elements, oxygen has the second highest electronegativity. Okay, so it's happy to accept those electrons, and then it turns into water. All right, but this is like a snowball rolling down a hill, or you can think of it as like a fireman bucket brigade of handing off the electrons to progressively stronger electron grabbers. And that electron rolling down a hill is coupled, or it's kind of also like an electrical wire. It is coupled to pumping protons into the intramembranous space to generate a gradient. Then the gradient is harvested, just like pressurized air would be harvested by letting a proton come back out of it. And that spins the ATP synthase to add a phosphate to ADP, adenosine diphosphate, with 2 phosphates to become ATP adenosine triphosphate with 3 phosphates. Okay, so rather extraordinary. It splits the atom. It's like a nuclear power plant. Okay, it's brilliant. Okay, the more you learn about this, the more you will believe in God if you have a brain in your head. Okay, what else? Oh, life began in the sea with the idea that the sea is full of salt, sodium chloride. It's full of calcium, limestone, and in order for the first cell to live, it had to wall off its borders, and it had to then pump out sodium and calcium. So cells have to pump out sodium and calcium. The reason is for osmotic purposes. You have to have same amount of ions, particles, osmolality inside the cell as outside the cell. So if you want to have anything else inside the cell, you got to get the original seawater, sodium and calcium, out of the cell. So if you look at blood will be like seawater, high in sodium and high in calcium. Whereas you look at the intracellular fluid, it's the opposite. It's going to be low in sodium. It's going to be low in calcium. Okay, and same thing with potassium. Potassium is high inside the cell because it's a unique thing about the intracellular environment is the high potassium. Okay, to some extent, just as potassium is a foil, like an opposite for sodium, magnesium is a foil, sort of the opposite for calcium. and they're on a seesaw relationship. If sodium goes up inside the cell, gets into the cell, then potassium is going to go down. And too much calcium getting into the cell will decrease the magnesium in the cell. Okay, I'm going to talk about the personality of the ions in a moment. I think that'll be a very helpful thing. An electrochemical gradient is built up on the cell. It's chemical in the sense that there's a sodium concentration gradient. It's electrical in the sense that there's a charge gradient. That'll all make more sense once I show you a picture. One abbreviation to be aware of is NCX, means NACA exchanger. Na for sodium, Ca for calcium, exchanger. It's abbreviated NCX. I'll show you a picture of it again. It'll make more sense. It's like a water wheel or a rotating circular door like in a big hotel or some other big building. Okay, again, glycolysis is like a coal-burning electrical plant. You only get 2 ATP per glucose molecule, whereas a mitochondria is a much more efficient energy production center. You get 36 ATP approximately for glucose, okay? All right, so we'll get into a bunch more pictures. You're going to be surprised at all the pictures that are coming. Well, first of all, here's how a cell works with its plasma membrane. The potassium-sodium ATP pump is pumping out 3 positive charges, only taking in 2. So more positive charges pumped out in the form of sodium. And that is the electrical current. This is the electrical generator. We have charge separation, a voltage across the plasma membrane. So this is like a battery. And because the charge is carried by sodium, we call it a sodium battery. And this is how the plasma membrane does almost all its work. It's rather incredible. This is the only thing pumping sodium out. All the other ones are bringing sodium inward. And sodium, I'm going to explain it in a moment, but it's like the angry poor trying to bust into the city. It wants to get into the city for 2 reasons. To neutralize its chemical gradient, because there's so much more sodium outside the cell, like 10 times as much, 140, same as the blood approximately, and only 14 inside the cell. Also, because there's an electrical gradient, it's positively charged, Na plus, and you've got negative 65 millivolts as the charge inside the cell, so it's attracted by that charge. And then now that you've got this gradient of sodium, you can couple that to pumping other things out. Like you can pump calcium out. This is the spinning rotating door thing that I was just referring to a moment ago. You let 3 sodiums come in and then pop, you can pop out a calcium. And you know, these things are incredible. You can pump out as many as 5,000 calcium molecules in 1 second. That's how incredibly fast all these things are. And if you think about it, anything you do fast with your body, with your hands, movement, it's all electrical. Anything that happens that fast has to be electrical. And it's incredibly fast that we can do all the things that we do. When calcium is elevated inside the cell, it causes the cell to carry out whatever action it's going to carry out. That's why I refer to calcium as the aristocrat ion. It's the boss. It bosses the rest of the cell around, okay? And this electrochemical gradient of sodium, it's also coupled to bringing sodium into the cell. It's coupled to pumping protons out of the cell, and that's NHX, so that would be sodium hydrogen exchanger, okay? NAX is sodium amino acid exchanger, okay? And that's how the plasma membrane does work, decides what comes into the cell and what goes out, okay? And it's brilliant in its ability to do that. Okay, now we're going to talk about the personality of the ions, okay? And first of all, here is calcium. Calcium is like a wife, and a wife is not the same as a husband. Anybody who's been married knows the wife is the center of attention. The wife is the center of all things social. The wife knows everybody. Everybody knows the wife, okay? The husband is sort of there to pay the bills, working most of the time. In small amounts and with a good heart and in a good mood, the wife is wonderful. She makes things good for everybody. But she's the boss. She tells the kid, you go upstairs, you eat your dinner now, you do this, you do this, you do this. The husband's out working, okay? So calcium is sort of the center of attention in the cell. And too much calcium, though, can be a pain in the butt. It can be like a bossy aristocrat who just is not reasonable and comes into the house and starts barking orders. And what I have seen was my mother was really nice and always in a good mood because she didn't have to work. So she was happy all day long. She did whatever she wanted. And when the kids came home, she was very happy to see him. And when Papa came home, she was real happy to see him too in general. But in general, nowadays, modern wives, they have to work all day. So they're kind of tired and they become kind of grouchy. And because they're the boss of the house, you know, wife has power over husband. It's just the way it is. Marriage is designed that way. She controls making the two-back beast, and she also comes out way ahead if there's a divorce. So she's got a lot of power in a marriage, okay? You know what they say at the wedding ceremony? The woman gets a ring on her finger, the man gets one in his nose, okay? So what's the difference between a wife and a girlfriend? About 20 minutes, okay? Well, a wife comes home, like when the wife comes home, like Mac's wife, she would come home, she'd be tired, she'd have worked all day, and you know, the house was all quiet before she came home, and then all of a sudden, the tranquility and peace is shattered. She walks in the kitchen and she says, looks at, you know, the kids left all their junk all over the countertops and unwashed dishes and stuff. She's like, what the F is this? What the F is this? What the F is this? Daughter, get over here and clean this up. Son, get over here and clean this up. Husband runs and hides in his office so he doesn't get involved in anything. Okay, what's the wife doing? Bitch, bitch, bitch. Favorite phrase is, where's my check? Once a month. Response to questions. Can you do my laundry? Do your own. Can you cook for me? No, I'm busy. You know how to cook. Can you fix my clothes? No, buy some new ones. You're so cheap. Tonight? No, no, no. Or occasionally, you got 3 minutes. That's it. Whereas a girlfriend's like, hi, honey, smooch, smooch, smooch. Of course I'll do the laundry. Of course I'll fix your clothes. Of course I'll cook for you. Tonight, it's understood. Why get married? Okay, anyways, calcium is the big bossy aristocrat that controls everything in the cell and is always the center of attention. That's just the way it is, and that will be useful to understanding physiology. Another interesting thing, like I mentioned that when I was home with the kids alone, the house was tranquil, okay? Nobody's yelling at each other. Nobody really cares what each other's doing. Each one is busy with their own personal business, whatever that may be. The cell is very peaceful and quiet. That's like the fourth phase of water. So this guy, Gerald Pollack, wrote all about the 4 phases of water. Of course, everybody knows there's solid, that's ice water. Liquid is water, water, liquid. Vapor is you know, water vapor, steam, okay? But there is a 4th phase of water, crystalline, and that is the main one in the human body. And if you think about it, we've all seen movies, you know, a person gets shot or something and they bleed, or you've had a little cut on yourself and you bleed. What comes out? Blood. How come if humans are 60% water, how come we don't see water come out when somebody's injured? We don't. It's because the water is in like a crystalline shape. It's semi-solid, kind of like a gel. Think of it as being like jello, a little bit like jello. All right, and so that is the tranquil way we are at rest. Our cell is at rest, okay? And I mention that because calcium comes in, and calcium with its double positive charges, you know, streaming into the cell causes a bit of a phase shift where the water, the crystalline gel becomes more liquefied, okay? We're not going to get into all the details of that. It's not fully understood, but it's still a cool concept. And it totally reminds me of the house being all quiet. All of a sudden, the wife comes home, sees that the kids left their crap all over the kitchen countertop. They didn't do the dishes. They didn't do their chores. And then starts yelling at the kids to do the chores. And it's a definite change. And then there's dog crap all over the house. And why didn't you clean up the dog crap? And then cleaning the dog crap's harsh cleaning chemicals. Papa runs to his office to get away from it all. But there's this total change in the tranquility of the cell. Okay? Now, what is potassium like? Potassium is like a blue-collar worker. Potassium is the middle class. Potassium does the grunt work. Potassium makes everything good for the cell. Okay? Potassium, you know, here's the railroad running. Think of that being like the sodium battery of the cell. It's doing the work. Behind the scenes, no glamour, just getting the work done. That is potassium. So this painting is called Train Station by Edward Lamson. Very beautiful. This one is called Work by Ford Madox Brown. I think that's Thomas Carlyle there on the side, the famous historian from England in the 1800s. But these are men at work doing all the stuff that needs to get done. Not very glamorous, but it needs to get done, and it makes things better for everybody in the city. Okay? That is potassium. Potassium is a good guy. Okay? And there are a lot of very serious machines in the cell, in the city. Okay? The flagella, for example, It is a really complex motor system. It has a brake, it has a clutch, it has an accelerator. Some of these flagella can spin as fast as 100,000 times per minute. They're incredible, okay? They're incredible, all right? And, you know, these machines, again, these are other reasons why I believe that God created life. It's so much more complicated. We can barely describe it, okay? We just try to cling to a few things we can understand, make sense out of, try to understand useful cause and effect, but it's incredibly complex, okay? And it's beautiful. It's magnificent. Okay, now here's a castle being, our city is inside the castle. I mean, these are the walls of the city, okay? The walls of the city. And here's a moat. The moat around the city is like the Glycocalyx. It also helps protect the city. All these troublemaker knights out here are a bunch of, think of them as being like inflammation, okay, or maybe bacteria in the blood or something. All right, but key point is the moat is like the Glycocalyx. I'll show you the structure of the Glycocalyx. Glycocalyx means, glyco means sugar, calyx means coating. It's this thing that sticks up above the plasma membrane. Here's the plasma membrane of the cells. Here's the lumen of, let's say, a blood vessel or any type of lumen of any bodily tissue. And they're kind of like trees sticking up from a hill, okay, but I'm going to show you what the glycocalyx look like on the cell surface, like any cell, like endothelium, the lining cells of the arteries. You've got your basic plasma membrane, then you have a core protein that sticks up from the plasma membrane. It's often called a syndecan, okay, and then attached to it, it has multiple side chains of what are called glycosaminoglycans. Glycos with some aminos on there, okay, glycans. All right, and these are like, let's say, heparin sulfate, and they're full of sulfates which are negative charged. Water binds to them because water has a dipole, partial charge. The hydrogen positive charges are attracted to the negative charges of the sulfates. And you've heard the expression slippery when wet. Well, that makes the lining of your arteries slippery, so the red cells and white cells get past it faster. Okay, well, anyways, this is like the moat around a city, the glycocalyx. It's typically about 600 nanometers high, and it's very anti-thrombotic, okay? If it gets damaged, sitting below it are adhesion molecules that are prothrombotic. Those are only about 60 nanometers high. I've given entire lectures about blood flow and glycocalyx. If you're interested, you can watch those separately, but I'm just stating that this is the moat around the protective anti-thrombotic layer around the cell. This has got a major zeta potential negative charge, which repels all the blood cells. White blood cells, red blood cells, they all have a negative charge in them, and that's the way you want it. You don't want things sticking together under good conditions. Sticking together means there's a problem. All right, now we're going to talk about magnesium, and magnesium is kind of the hero of the cell in terms of the ions. The personality of magnesium, it is, you know, strong and brave, like Ben-Hur was in the movie, Charlton Heston in the movie Ben-Hur. And here's one of the things it does, controlling the powerful horses. Magnesium has a 2+ positive charge, and that is used to control ATP. So here's adenosine triphosphate, 1, 2, 3 phosphates. They got these big negative charges, and they want to repel each other. It's a highly energized phosphate bond. Okay, so what prevents the outer phosphate from popping off? That the positive charge on the magnesium, 2+, it holds the phosphates in place until the chemical reaction from the enzyme is ready to deliver this phosphate to something to energize it. Okay, so magnesium controls it. You need magnesium for all these ATP reactions. A lot of people don't know that. The vast majority of Americans are magnesium deficient. And why? Because it comes from plants. It's in the center of chlorophyll, okay? Eat your plants and get your magnesium. But most Americans are deficient in it, so they're sort of underpowered in their health. You need magnesium for everything. You need magnesium for your calcium, for your sodium potassium pump. You can't even get your potassium to where it should be unless you have enough magnesium on board. So magnesium is super important. And a lot of people supplement with it. And, you know, the smart thing is just eat it in your diet. But, okay, now here's another thing about magnesium. Magnesium is the guard. You see how it's guarding this ion channel? This is one of the Swiss guards at the Vatican. Magnesium sits in the nmda receptor. This is the receptor on the postsynaptic neuron for glutamate. Magnesium sits there and guards the center of it. The nmda receptor is set up such that magnesium can get right into the center of it. It's attracted to the negative charge inside the neuron, the negative 65 millivolt charge inside of the brain cell, the neuron cell. But if this becomes depolarized, when the charge gradient is gone, the magnesium will pop out of there and then calcium can flood into the cell. But When it's supposed to be there, magnesium is blocking it. So it prevents overactivation of your brain cells. This helps prevent anxiety, okay? And that's why magnesium is called M for mellow. It's the mellow ion. Remember that magnesium is M for mellow. It calms you down. It relaxes you, prevents anxiety, prevents epilepsy, prevents seizure. Magnesium is good, and we tend to be a little bit deficient in it. Just like many family homes nowadays are deficient in fathers. So I say magnesium is kind of like the father. And the fact that I am a father, you can guarantee I'm not at all biased. Not at all. Not even 1%. Thinking fathers are wonderful. Okay. So the father is a bit of a guard, you know. He's keeping the umbrella more over mama than himself. He's so nice. This painting is beautiful. Sunday Morning by Edmund Leighton. He's like one of the greatest artists of the 1800s. He's magnificent, Edmund Leighton. If you just look him up, you can just type his name in and go to see his paintings. They're incredible. Okay, Arriving Home by Wyeth, 1924. You know, and there's a nice family scene. You know, Dad's been at work all day. He wants to see the kids. He's real happy to see them. He's happy to see Mama too. There's the white picket fence. There's the suburbs back in the good old days in the 1970s. America was wealthy. Everybody was married. Both parents were home. Almost everybody was. Hey, Mama didn't even have to work. Anyways, there's Dada. Magnesium keeps things mellow, tries to make everybody be happy, but he's not around as much as you'd like him to be. Many homes, especially today, are deficient in fathers and magnesium. Okay. Now we get to sodium, and sodium is the angry ion. Sodium is the angry poor. And here I've got a picture of Les Miserables from Victor Hugo's, the miserable ones, the poor wretches. Okay, and here they are in Paris. This is 1848 or whatever. And they're chaotic. They want to bust in, okay? And you can think of them as the angry poor who are like homeless and forced to live outside the city, and they want to get into the city. And they want to bust down the gates, bust into the city. So sodium is trying to bust into the cell, okay? And that's useful to remember. All right. So whenever you let sodium come into the cell, it generates so much energy, you can couple that to pushing something out. And that's how you make sense of the ions. All right, here's some of that same stuff in more detail. The concentration of calcium is also very high outside the cell. But when calcium gets into the cell, man, it just takes over and makes the cell do whatever that cell's supposed to do. If it's a neuron, the calcium coming in makes it secrete insulin. If it's a vascular smooth muscle, makes it contract. Skeletal muscle makes it contract. Okay. For other cells, makes them release their hormone. For example, in the pancreas, elevated cytoplasmic calcium causes the cell to release the insulin. Okay. In order to get the calcium out of the cell, you got to pump it out because you're pumping against a gradient, high concentration outside the cell. You need ATP for that. And the electrochemical gradient made by this pump right here of the sodium is used to pump it out, like we talked about the NACA exchanger. Okay, you've got a little bit of a bank of calcium sitting inside your endoplasmic reticulum. Okay, and the bottom line is, it all comes down. All roads lead to Rome, and they all lead to calcium, and they all lead to Mama. In a family, Mama is the boss. Mama controls everything. Dada, no matter how good a guy he is. Families are run by mamas, okay? My mom was a great matriarch, okay? She ran not just our family, but all the extended family as well. And I'm just telling you, in a cell, calcium decides what gets done. So that's why everything needs to be related to calcium. There's just no way around it, okay? So here it is, an example of things that will increase cytoplasmic calcium. And there's a lot of stuff. And in the modern world, doctors don't know this. This is like fundamental to physiology. And you go into you read Harvard, either Ivy League textbooks of neurology, neurophysiology. They barely touch the subject. It's the most important thing you should be talking about when you talk about the brain. How do you regulate cytoplasmic calcium? What are all the problems that make it be elevated? Elevated stress, sleep, caffeine, excessive dietary sodium, ischemia, lack of blood flow, SERCA inhibitors, mitochondria inhibitors, traumatic brain injury, cell phone, Wi-Fi, EMF, opening up voltage-gated calcium channels, the no pathway, nitric oxide peroxynitrite pathway of Martin Pall, okay, oxidative stress, volatile organic chemicals. All of these things are increasing cytoplasmic calcium. That's why you have to work so hard to protect it. Aspartame, stimulants like for ADHD, glutamate, excess MSG in your food, okay, aspartame, yuck. Glyphosate's an excitotoxin as well. Beta amyloid protein is an excitotoxin, and that comes from insulin resistance, okay, with diabetes and whatnot. Leaky gut can cause neuroinflammation, and it can lead to increased cytoplasmic calcium in your brain cells. So there's a lot of stuff going on, and that's a big subject. We won't talk about it anymore today, but it's the center. It's the determining thing. So having mama be in a good mood and run things nice, that determines if the house is happy. If mama not happy, the house not happy. If mama happy, the house got the chance to be happy. All right, well, anyways, that is how a city is like a cell, and I hope that was helpful and interesting.